There is a woman who woke up every morning for over 4 decades and did the exact same thing. She made a small cup of herbal tea, sat by her window for 15 minutes without her phone, without the news, without a single notification demanding her attention, and she simply watched the world move. She did not call it meditation. She did not have a name for it. She just called it her time. She lived to be 110 years old, and when a researcher finally sat down beside her and asked what her greatest secret was, she looked at him for a long moment and said something that stopped him completely. She said, "Nobody ever asked me before." Think about that for a second. Here is a person who has outlived wars, economic collapse, the invention of television, the internet, smartphones, and entire generations of people who thought they had everything figured out, and in all that time, not a single person thought to sit down and ask her what she knew. We spend thousands of dollars on supplements. We download apps that track our sleep. We read studies and buy books and follow influencers who are 32 years old telling us how to live longer. And yet the people who have actually done it, who have crossed the 100-year mark and kept going, are sitting in chairs by windows, waiting for someone to ask them the right question. The conversation around longevity has changed dramatically in recent years, but it has changed in a direction that would make most centenarians quietly laugh. We have made living a long life into a performance. We have turned it into a competition of biometrics and optimization routines and expensive interventions that promise to reverse aging at the cellular level. A team of longevity experts who spent decades enrolling thousands of centenarians in long-term studies found something that keeps appearing in the data no matter where in the world the subjects come from. They do not sweat the small stuff. They eat varied, mostly natural food. They stay connected to the people around them. And they maintain a deep, quiet sense of purpose that does not evaporate when circumstances get hard. These are not secrets. They are not even surprising when you hear them. But we keep ignoring them because they do not feel dramatic enough. And the first truth this teaches us is perhaps the most uncomfortable one of all. We are not actually looking for answers. We're looking for permission to keep doing what we are already doing while hoping for a different result. Let's talk about what the world's oldest people actually ate, because this is where most conversations go wrong almost immediately. Everyone wants a list. Everyone wants to know the one food, the one supplement, the one dietary pattern that crossed the finish line. The reality is far more interesting and far less marketable than that. In the blue zones, the regions of the world with the highest concentration of people who live past 100, the diets vary enormously from one place to the next. In Okinawa, Japan, people eat sweet potatoes, tofu, seaweed, and very small amounts of fish. In Sardinia, Italy, the diet leans heavily on olive oil, local cheese, whole grain bread, and beans. In Loma Linda, California, the longest living community in North America maintains a mostly plant-based diet rooted in their faith traditions. In Nicoya, Costa Rica, the foundation is corn, black beans, and tropical fruits. These diets share almost no signature ingredient. What they share is a principle. They're all built around whole, locally sourced food, eaten in reasonable portions, without the anxiety that has come to define the modern relationship with eating. One of the oldest recorded people alive until her passing ate what she wanted, danced regularly, and avoided meat her entire life. Not because a nutritionist told her to, but because it felt right to her body. That instinctive, respectful relationship with food is what almost every centenarian has in common. And it is one of the most powerful things you can begin to cultivate right now, regardless of what your current diet looks like. The second truth is about movement, and it will likely surprise you in the best possible way. A researcher who spent 5 years visiting centenarians across multiple countries came back with an observation that cut straight through the noise of the modern fitness industry. Not a single one of them had a gym membership. Not one. They had never done a structured workout in the contemporary sense of the word. They did not count reps or track heart rate zones or obsess over recovery metrics. What they did was move. Constantly, naturally, and without making a production of it. They walked to where they were going. They tended their gardens. They cooked their own food, which requires standing and moving around a kitchen for significant periods of time. They clean their homes. They climb stairs without thinking about it. This is what researchers now refer to as natural movement, and it turns out it is one of the most protective things a human body can experience. The human body was not designed to sit still for 16 hours and then sprint on a treadmill for 45 minutes. It was designed for consistent, low-level movement woven into the fabric of daily life. When you engineer that movement out of your day by taking elevators, driving everywhere, sitting at desks, and outsourcing physical tasks, you're not just losing fitness. You are removing one of the fundamental signals your body relies on to stay alive and functioning. Walking deserves its own moment here, because the evidence for it is so staggering and so consistently overlooked that it almost feels like a deliberate secret being kept from us. Though of course it is not a secret at all. It is just deeply unsexy in a world trying to sell you something more complicated. Research has shown that walking at a brisk pace for 30 minutes a day can help reduce the risk of severe disease and meaningfully extend lifespan. One centenarian who was interviewed about his longevity said he never used an elevator for the entirety of his medical career. He walked up and down every staircase in the hospital where he worked. He walked across the city instead of hailing taxis. He walked because he liked it, because it gave him time to think, because it made him feel like himself. He was still doing it in his late 90s. Another man, who worked as a railway clerk until he was 83 years old, said on his 112th birthday that the key to everything was simple. Keep your mind and body both busy, he said, and you'll be here a long time. He still exercised every single day when he said it. These are not anomalies. These are patterns that appear over and over again in the data, in the testimonies, in the lives of people who have simply refused to stop moving through the world with intention. The third truth is the one that tends to hit people the hardest when they really sit with it. Loneliness is not just an emotional experience. It is a physical one, and it is one of the most dangerous conditions a human being can be in. Research has demonstrated repeatedly that chronic loneliness elevates inflammation in the body, weakens immune function, disrupts sleep, and shortens lifespan in ways that are comparable to smoking more than a dozen cigarettes a day. Read that again if you need to. We have built an entire public health infrastructure around warning people about cigarettes. We put images on the packaging. We ran decades of campaigns. And yet loneliness, which carries a similar physiological burden, gets treated as a personal failing rather than a public health crisis. The centenarians figured this out without reading any studies. They stayed connected. Not performatively connected in the way social media has taught us to simulate connection, but genuinely, physically, consistently present in each other's lives. In Okinawa, there is a social structure called moai, which is essentially a small group of lifelong friends who meet regularly, share resources, support each other through difficulty, and simply show up for one another decade after decade. Many of these groups form in childhood and last until death. Researchers believe this consistent social fabric is one of the primary reasons Okinawa has produced so many people who live past 100. A 98-year-old woman on the island of Ikaria was asked by a researcher whether she ever felt lonely. She looked at him the way you might look at someone who had just asked you if you ever felt wet while swimming. She said, "How can I feel lonely? Someone is always walking through my door." That single response contains more practical wisdom about human health than most wellness content produced in an entire year. She was not describing an accident. She was describing the result of decades of investment in relationships, in community, in being someone who shows up, which means people show up for her in return. This is the third truth. The quality and consistency of your relationships is not a nice addition to a healthy life. It is one of its primary foundations. And if you are someone who has allowed your friendships to thin out over the years, who has let the busyness of adulthood crowd out the people who matter, who tells yourself you will reconnect when things slow down, then this is the part of this story that is speaking directly to you. Because things will not slow down on their own. And the cost of waiting is measured not just in missed moments, but in actual years of life. The fourth truth is about purpose and it requires a slightly different kind of honesty. Purpose is a word that has been so thoroughly colonized by self-help culture that it has almost lost its meaning. We tend to associate it with grand declarations and dramatic reinventions, with quitting your job to travel the world, or starting a foundation, or having a singular mission that defines your entire identity. But that is not what purpose looks like in the lives of people who actually live the longest. What it looks like consistently and almost universally among centenarians is something far quieter and far more available to you right now. A garden that needs tending, grandchildren who need picking up from school, a neighbor who relies on you to bring something by on Thursdays, an animal that waits for you, a skill you share with others, a routine that organizes your days and gives them shape. Every single centenarian who has been studied in meaningful depth had something that got them out of bed. Not a passion project in the Instagram sense, but a living reason, something that needed them, something that would notice their absence. Researchers who study the longest living people consistently describe this as one of the most universal findings across all cultures and all demographics. Purpose functions as a biological anchor. It reduces stress hormones, promotes healthy behavior, and appears to activate mechanisms in the body that support cellular repair and immune function. In Japan, there's a concept called ikigai, which translates roughly to a reason for being. It sits at the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be supported by. But long before researchers wrote books about it or became a popular framework in productivity circles, the oldest people in Okinawa were simply living it. They were not searching for their ikigai. They already had it in the form of their daily lives, their relationships, their roles in their communities. A 102-year-old doctor who practiced medicine for most of her life said that she had always had a purpose and something to live for, and that you do not find that if you are not looking for it. She described purpose not as a destination you arrive at, but as something you orient yourself toward every single day. That small but consistent orientation, that daily decision to move in the direction of what matters, turns out to be one of the most powerful forces in determining how long and how well you live. The research increasingly supports what these long-lived people have known intuitively for a century. Purpose is not a luxury. It is a necessity, and the absence of it is not a spiritual problem. It is a health problem. The fifth truth is about stress, and it is probably the most counterintuitive one because it is not telling you to eliminate stress. It is telling you to change your relationship with it. The oldest people in the world did not live stress-free lives. That is a fantasy. They survived world wars. They lost children in some cases. They experienced economic devastation and personal heartbreak and all the accumulated grief that comes with outliving almost everyone you have ever loved. What they did not do was carry it forward indefinitely. One of the most consistent psychological traits found in centenarians across cultures is what researchers call emotional flexibility. They do not brood. They do not hold grudges for long. They forgive, not always because they feel like it, but because they seem to understand intuitively that holding on to resentment is something their body cannot afford. A researcher studying the world's longest living people noted that centenarians tend to focus on the positives in life. They let go of things beyond their control. They embrace optimism not as a performance, but as a practical orientation toward reality. And the physiological consequences of this are significant. Optimism has been shown to affect inflammation, immune response, cardiovascular health, and even the way certain genes are expressed. The people who lived the longest were not the ones who had the easiest lives. They were the ones who processed difficulty and kept moving. There's a pattern here that keeps emerging no matter which centenarian you study, no matter which culture or country or set of circumstances you examine. The people who live the longest are not the ones who fought hardest against aging. They're the ones who stopped spending energy fighting life itself. They accepted difficulty without catastrophizing it. They maintained their routines without rigidity. They invested in people without keeping score. And they did all of this not because they were following a program, but because they had arrived through decades of lived experience at a kind of clarity that most of us are still searching for in books and videos and weekend retreats. That clarity is available to you. It does not require a guru or a significant life event or hitting rock bottom before you can access it. It requires only that you take seriously the testimony of people who have already done the thing you're trying to figure out. They're telling us. They have always been telling us. The problem has never been a lack of information. The problem is that the information they carry does not fit neatly into a 30-day challenge or a before and after photo. It fits into a life, specifically the kind of life that is built slowly and deliberately over decades. Let's talk about sleep for a moment because it is conspicuously absent from a lot of longevity conversations, and yet it sits underneath almost everything else. When you look at the daily rhythms of centenarians, what you find repeatedly is that they honor rest without apologizing for it. They nap. Many of them nap regularly and without guilt, something that cultures in the blue zones have built into the rhythm of the day as a normal and expected practice. They go to sleep when it gets dark and they wake when it is light. They do not scroll through devices until 2 in the morning and then wonder why their body feels like it is working against them. There is growing evidence that inadequate sleep accelerates almost every biological marker of aging. It impairs immune function, disrupts the hormonal systems that regulate appetite and metabolism, weakens cognitive function, elevates cortisol, and reduces the body's ability to repair cellular damage overnight. The centenarians did not have access to sleep science research, but they lived in ways that naturally protected their sleep because they had not yet invented the dozen different mechanisms modern life has created for disrupting it. Reclaiming your sleep is not a passive thing. It is an active, daily decision. And if you are someone who has been treating sleep as negotiable, the accumulated testimony of every long-lived person in human history is suggesting you reconsider. The sixth truth is perhaps the simplest and the most radical, and it is this. Consistency across a long period of time is worth more than intensity across a short one. This is the lesson that underlies every other lesson. It is the meta-pattern that emerges when you look at the full arc of a century-long life. The centenarians did not eat perfectly every day. They had treats. Wilson kept a chocolate cake in her freezer and allowed herself a slice once a week. Coronios loved tiramisu. Cantrell ate bacon daily and tended her garden with the same quiet devotion. They were not ascetics. They were not martyrs to their own wellness. What they were was consistent. Day after day, year after year, decade after decade, they made small choices that added up to something extraordinary. They walked instead of sitting. They called a friend instead of stewing alone. They went to bed at a reasonable hour. They ate a meal with vegetables in it. They laughed. They forgave. They found something worth doing, and they did it again the next day. That is the whole secret. It is not thrilling to say out loud. It does not generate clicks or subscribers or viral moments. There is something worth saying about the relationship between faith, community, and longevity that tends to get lost in more secular conversations about health. Research consistently shows that people who belong to faith-based communities live longer on average, and the initial instinct is to attribute this to lifestyle factors, the absence of certain behaviors, the presence of others. But researchers have found that the effect goes deeper than behavior. It is about belonging. It is about having a shared framework of meaning that connects you to people across generations, that gives you a role in a story larger than your individual life, and that provides a community of consistent social support that shows up without being asked. In Loma Linda, a Seventh-day Adventist community in California, the combination of plant-based diet, regular rest, strong community ties, and shared spiritual practice has produced one of the highest concentrations of centenarians in the United States. In Sardinia, in Ikaria, the relationship between religious tradition and community life creates the same effect through a different cultural expression. The mechanism is belonging. The mechanism is meaning. And while you do not need to belong to any particular tradition to access those things, You do need to take seriously the human requirement for both. Here is something that almost never gets said in conversations about longevity, but that comes up repeatedly in the actual testimonies of centenarians. They laugh. A lot. A 98-year-old man named Larry, when asked about his secret to a long life, cracked a joke immediately, and then at the end of the interview, made another one, and said simply, "You have to laugh in life." That is not a throwaway comment. Laughter, genuine humor, the ability to find the absurd and the light in the midst of life's weight, is a consistent characteristic of the people who live the longest. It reduces cortisol. It strengthens social bonds. It signals to the nervous system that the current moment is survivable. And it is a habit, just like walking and sleeping and eating reasonably well. And it is a habit, just like walking and sleeping and eating reasonably well. It is a practice that can be cultivated by the choices you make about who you spend time with, what you allow to occupy your attention, and how seriously you insist on taking yourself in situations that probably do not require it. The oldest people in the world are, by and large, people who kept their sense of humor. They watched the world become almost unrecognizable over the course of their lives, and they found it, at least sometimes, genuinely funny. That lightness is not incidental to their longevity. It is part of it. Let us take a moment to address something that comes up whenever this conversation happens. Someone always asks whether genetics is the real answer, whether some people are just born to live long and everyone else is simply working with a different set of cards. The science on this is actually quite clear, and the answer is both yes and no in proportions that should change how you think about your own possibilities. Genetics does play a role. There are families with remarkable concentrations of long-lived members, suggesting that certain inherited factors contribute to longevity. But when researchers look at the overall picture, they find that for the vast majority of people, genetics accounts for only about 25% of the longevity equation. The other 75% is shaped by behavior, environment, relationships, and the choices made consistently over time. This is not a small finding. This is a finding that puts the majority of the outcome in your hands. It means that even if your family history does not include a single person who lived past 70, you are still operating with enormous potential that has not yet been expressed. The centenarians who have no family history of exceptional longevity, but who lived well past 100, are living proof of this. Lifestyle can override genetics in ways that should feel profoundly empowering rather than overwhelming. One of the most fascinating and underreported areas of centenarian research involves the brain, specifically the question of how some people maintain remarkable cognitive function well into their 10th and 11th decade of life. Researchers studying centenarians have encountered what they call cognitive superagers, people who function mentally at levels comparable to individuals 30 years younger. The finding that makes this especially interesting is that some of these individuals, when their brain tissue is examined after death, show significant protein buildup associated with conditions like Alzheimer's disease, yet they functioned extremely well in daily life right up until the end. This disconnect between biological markers of disease and actual cognitive function suggests a concept called resilience, and researchers are still working to understand how some brains develop it while others do not. What the behavioral data suggests is that staying mentally engaged, continuing to learn, maintaining social connection, and preserving a sense of purpose all contribute to the brain's ability to compensate and adapt even in the presence of underlying changes. The oldest man ever recorded in the United States said on his 112th birthday that keeping both your mind and your body busy was the whole answer. He was exercising every day when he said it. He was right in ways that science is only now beginning to fully map. We are now at a point in human history where the number of people living past 100 is growing rapidly. In the United States alone, the Census Bureau reported in 2025 that the centenarian population grew by 50% in a single decade. This is not purely a medical achievement, though medicine deserves credit for some of it. It is increasingly a reflection of the fact that more people are living in ways that make extreme longevity possible. But here is what that statistic should not become. It should not become pressure. It should not become another metric against which you measure your adequacy. The researchers who study centenarians are refreshingly clear about this. Their goal is not to get everyone to live to 100. Their goal is to understand how people can live to whatever age they reach in very good health, with function, with presence, with the ability to still do the things they love and to still be genuinely themselves. That framing matters enormously, because the point of everything in this story is not to add years to your life as an abstract number. The point is to add life to your years and to understand that the habits and choices and relationships that make 100 possible are the same ones that make 50 feel like something worth showing up for fully. So what do you do with all of this? What does it look like on a Tuesday morning when you have a meeting at 9 and a headache from not sleeping well and a friendship you have been meaning to tend to for 6 months and a sense of purpose that feels like it has gone slightly out of focus? It looks like this. You walk somewhere today instead of driving if you can. You call the person you have been meaning to call. You eat something that grew in the ground at some point before it reached your plate. You let the small frustration you woke up carrying dissolve instead of feeding it. You do something, anything, that reminds you why you are here and what you are for. None of these actions are dramatic. None of them will trend anywhere. None of them will feel like a turning point when you do them. But that is exactly the lesson. The turning point is not a moment. It is a direction. And every single one of the 110-year lives that have been studied, celebrated, marveled at, and quietly envied began exactly the same way that yours did, with a single day and a choice about how to spend it. The oldest people in the world did not wake up one morning having solved the problem of aging. They simply kept choosing, day after day, to live in a way that their body and mind and spirit could sustain. There's a woman sitting by a window somewhere right now. She has lived through things you cannot fully imagine. She has loved people who are gone, rebuilt herself in the aftermath of losses that would have stopped most people cold, found her way back to laughter more times than she can count, and kept moving forward with the kind of quiet stubbornness that does not make headlines but does make centuries. Nobody is filming her. Nobody is about to sit down and ask her what she knows. But she knows. They all know. And what they know is not locked in a laboratory or hidden behind a paywall or available only to people with the right resources and the right circumstances. It is available in the morning walk you keep putting off. It is available in the phone call you keep delaying. It is available in the meal you make with your hands and eat slowly without distraction. It is available in the decision to go to sleep at a reasonable hour and let tomorrow be tomorrow. Life is not short because it does not last long enough. Life feels short because we spend so much of it waiting for the right moment to begin living it the way we already know we should. The oldest people alive are not telling us anything new. They're just telling us again, as gently and persistently as time itself, that the moment to begin is always, without exception, right now.